Greece is warned to seize a last opportunity as an emergency summit looms with EU leaders. Athens remains deadlocked with European creditors as it seeks to avert a default on its debts. But can the protest party now in charge reach an 11th hour deal on cash for reforms? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. It campaigned on the slogan, "Hope is coming," and a promise to end austerity. But the Greek protest party, Syriza, is finding life a lot tougher in government as it tries to hammer out not just a face-saving deal, but any deal at all with its European creditors. Greece has until the end of the month to agree reforms that will unlock desperately needed cash for an international bailout or face default and worse. Tense talks in Luxembourg broke down within an hour of starting on Thursday, leaving hopes pinned on an emergency summit of EU leaders planned for Monday.
We are dangerously close to a state of mind that accepts an accident. And I urge my colleagues not to fall prey to this state of mind. We can forge a good agreement. Our government is standing by with ideas and with the determination to cultivate the two forms of trust necessary to end this Greek drama.
What we need is credible measures which fill in the fiscal gaps, which are still in the talks, and credible measures to bring the economy back on track. Those measures are not popular. They will not be easy to take, and the big question is whether the Greek government is prepared to take them, because they are inevitable, they are necessary for Greece. And if they're not prepared to do that, then they are taking a big risk on the future of Greece. So I strongly hope that over the coming days they will come up with those proposals.
We can only arrive at a resolution if there is a dialogue. And for the moment we are short of the dialogue. So the key emergency, in my view, is to restore a dialogue with adults in the room.
In the meantime, the European Central Bank raised the level of emergency funding for Greek banks on Friday as savers rush to withdraw their money. Al Jazeera's John Saropoulos has more from Athens.
There is the possibility that Greece and the institutions, the creditors, may not be able to control this process beyond a certain point. While markets seem to be keeping their cool at the moment, depositors in Greek banks certainly are not. They've withdrawn 3 billion euros between Monday and Thursday of this week, and reports are that on Friday they withdrew a further billion euros. This has been an ongoing process, of course, since elections were declared in December of last year. A total of 40 billion euros have left Greek banks, a quarter of all deposits. This is hardly a vote of confidence in this government and its tactics of brinkmanship with the European Union. Greeks are now very worried that the Greek government may have carried its negotiation tactic too far. It may have overplayed its hand. And there is also the side of the markets, of the investors here in Greece. Investment has fallen so much that whereas at the end of last year, when the 2015 budget was being drawn up, Greece was predicted to have a growth rate of 2.5% of GDP this year, that has now turned into a recession of 0.5% at least. So a 3-point shift in the economy's prospects, again, because of the political tenor of this negotiation, particularly on the Greek side, which has cultivated an image of creditors as meaning ill, as being malicious towards the Greeks. And that tenor, of course, means that all sense of collegiality has broken down between Athens and Brussels, and Athens and the IMF in Washington. And it's led to a souring of relations, leading many people to believe that regardless of the substance of the negotiation, on the politics, the two sides either can't or won't find a resolution.
Well, let's get the thoughts of our guests. In London, we have Nina Schick, Communications Director for Open Europe and an EU policy analyst. Joining us from Athens is Anastasia Jamali, Syriza campaigner and journalist at the Dawn newspaper. And also in London is Jane Foley, Senior Foreign Exchange Strategist at Rabobank International. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Nina Schick. Is there any hope that, given the hostile tenor of the debate of recent days, that a deal can be reached Monday?
Well, I think there's still hope, but the thing that everyone is counting on now is for Athens to come back with some concrete proposals. The reasons why the Eurogroup meeting broke down so quickly yesterday is that Athens has put nothing new on the table. What the creditors want to see from Syriza and the Athens government is, in fact, more detailed structural reforms. They want to know that Athens will be able to deliver on structural reforms. They want them to stop talking about solidarity and social responsibility and actually have a strong commitment to putting forward some of these reforms.
Well, Anastasia Jamali, what is the feeling in Greece? Is there hope still that there will be a deal reached?
The Prime Minister spoke to the public this morning saying that he is optimistic that a deal can be reached. And also, Yanis Varoufakis, during last night's Eurogroup, said that our political mandate, the Greek government's political mandate, is to reach an honourable, workable compromise. So I'm thinking that maybe what we are looking at is probably an extension of the deal of the agreement and the programme that comes to an end on the 30th of June.
Jane Foley, your view on the situation?
Well, I think from the point of view of investors, I think investors are perhaps preparing for the worst, but still hoping for the best, hoping that Monday's summit from the EU ministers will finally bring some respite. But of course, we've been here before. It feels as if we've been at the 11th hour, the cliff edge, for a very long time with Greece. And certainly, we've got to ask ourselves, I think all investors will ask themselves, even if there is a deal now, how much respite will that bring? Because certainly it seems that without significant structural reforms, there will be, again, times with Greece when the market's concerned about restructuring of debt, concerns about further difficulties with the creditors, about another bailout. And in fact, if we look at perhaps the damage to the Greek economy just this year alone, we see, of course, the slowdown in growth, the damage from a lack of investment, and that won't necessarily disappear overnight. So Greece will remain very much a headline issue as far as the investment community is concerned for quite a long time.
Well, Nina Schick, talking about the current economic situation, Greece emerged from recession last year, but now once again you've got recession looming within the last few months. So economically as well, this is a pretty sick puppy, is it not?
Absolutely, and I think the fundamental problem is that Greece will need further debt restructuring. And this is the problem with the original bailouts. I mean, that's where the eurozone actually failed Greece, if you will. And without further debt relief, it's unlikely, like Jane just mentioned, that this problem is going to go away. Even if there is an agreement on Monday, which again is tenuous, but we're hoping that there might be some kind of 11th hour deal. Both sides will say this is a great success. We're going to see this coming back, 6 months down the line, 3 months down the line. The fundamental issue hasn't gone. And the reason why that is so is because it brings into play larger existential questions about the EU and the eurozone. Because what happened after the Greek bailout in 2012 is that Greek debt was transferred from private institutions to public institutions. So basically, the eurozone taxpayer now holds Greek debt. And the national governments of the other eurozone countries can't write off Greek debt without their own electorates agreeing to it. So rather than this being a clash of economic ideologies, this is a clash of democracies, which brings into question the larger existential question about the future of the eurozone. Is the future of the eurozone to be a union with fiscal transfers, or is it not? And these are the questions that politicians have to think about when otherwise, we'll see Greece and the rest of the Eurozone periphery likely going from one crisis to the other.
Well, I'm going to return to a couple of those points in a moment, but Anastasia Jamali, we have seen as well the Greek central bank coming under a lot of pressure in recent days. Reports of threats of a run on the bank with people drawing money. The European Central Bank extending some finances until Monday at the very last. This, of course, a great concern to the functioning of the central bank, is it not?
In general, the situation here, it's a very usual terror tactic to talking about a bank run, although I must tell you that I'm in the center of Athens right now and all the banks are dispensing money normally, notes normally, and it's business as usual. Of course, there is a problem. There is an outflow of cash from the banks, but the Greek government is very confident that there won't be a problem, because even the money that has gone out of the bank, I have the numbers here, during the last few days, we've had around only 1.2 billion leaving on Thursday, yesterday, but these numbers are relatively smaller than what has happened in Greece in 2012, so I think that there won't be a problem.
Well, Jane Foley, your view on that, is there any threat of a run on the central bank, or do you think the situation is contained at this stage?
I think it's a highly dangerous and volatile position, and in fact perhaps again we have had another headline this afternoon that the ECB has allowed more emergency funding to the Greek banks. Now clearly this is holding up the Greek banking industry. But, of course, the big problem arises at what if there is a default at the end of the month? What if Greece does not pay the IMF? What if at some point in the next few weeks the ECB decides that it cannot, under its mandate, carry on giving Greece emergency lending? And that is where the real problem would start for the Greek banks.
Well, Greece was given 2 bailouts in 2010, then 2 years later, to avoid defaulting on its debts. There were strict conditions, what were known as austerity measures, spending cuts, tax increases and other reforms. The loans from the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank and the European Union totaled $280 billion. The 3 creditors are demanding further reforms, including the pension system and VAT, before releasing the latest tranche of $8 billion. The Greek government needs it to repay $1.8 billion to the IMF at the end of this month, the first in a series of repayments due over summer. Savers have also withdrawn billions of dollars from Greek banks this week. It's this flight of funds and the possibility of a Greek default which is driving renewed concerns of an exit from the eurozone. Anastasia Jamali, I want to come back to you. The present government insists that these deals were made by a previous administration and were in fact repudiated by the people in January's election. This is the argument that's being given by the current government. There doesn't appear to be much mood for compromise, is there?
The Greek government, despite this terror tactic, despite the threats for Grexit and all that, is consistent and committed to reach a deal, but a deal, as I told you, that will be mutually benefiting. As far as the past 5 years, I have to tell you that wages fell by around 35%. This all comes from the official statement of the finance minister, of his official speech, yesterday during the Eurogroup. Wages fell by 35%. Pensions fell by around 50%, if I remember correctly, by 47%. And the GDP fell by 25%. This can no longer continue. There is no room for more austerity here in Greece. So what the Greek government is saying is that the political mandate she has, the political order, and the promise she made was to fight for a new deal that will enable the working classes, the people, the poor people, to live with dignity. So this is pretty much the plan. And the red lines are now about the pensions and about the collective bargaining.
Well, Nina Schick, returning to a point that you were alluding to a little while ago and staying with this particular issue, the report of the Greek Parliamentary Committee is even stronger. It says these loans were an attack premeditated by the International Monetary Fund, the ECB and the European Community. It described it as violent, illegal and immoral mission aimed at something that you just mentioned, shifting private debt to the public sector. What kind of veracity lies behind these claims?
Well, yes, the report by the Debt Truth Committee was very interesting to read, and you can understand why in these negotiations goodwill has broken down, because some of the things some of the barbs that have been exchanged on both sides certainly hasn't helped in reaching any kind of agreement. However, coming back to a point that I made earlier, this has often been termed as a clash between ideologies, so austerity, imposing austerity upon Greece. But what it fundamentally actually comes down to is more complicated than that. Because during the second bailout, Greek debt has been moved to basically the public institutions and now is held by the eurozone taxpayer. Other eurozone governments are unable to write off Greek debt without having the mandate from their people. So the argument that Syriza is making, that the people of Greece stand behind them in trying to demolish austerity and trying to cut off some of their debt, that applies also to the other eurozone countries. You only had to listen to what Merkel was saying in the Bundestag yesterday, as well as other German politicians, saying that the majority of German people and certainly other eurozone taxpayers, they don't want Greek debt to be pardoned because they hold it. So there you have a clash, which is coming back to this existential problem which is existing in the eurozone right now.
Well, Jane
which is
Foley,
probably why we won't see a resolution.
Jane Foley, I mean, at this point that we're discussing now, that this is a matter of democracy as much as it is of economics. What's your view?
Well, once again, I suppose it depends who you're asking, because certainly it's very easy to have sympathy for the impoverished people in Greece. But then again, if they think that the end of austerity is a democratic resolution for them, once again, as we've just been hearing, you ask the people who are holding that debt, and it wouldn't necessarily be democratic for their governors to get rid of that debt without their permission. So again, this is a very complex issue, but we can perhaps take it back further and look at 1999, and we can look at perhaps the reasonings for Greece. This, I think, was very political. It was about holding Europe together, perhaps in the wake of the Second World War. And I think, I still believe that, generally speaking, the politicians of Europe still want EMU as a coherent political institution. Now, as we got through the depths of the crisis in 2012, I think we discovered what economists have been arguing for a long time, that it's very difficult to have a monetary union without a fiscal union. But once again, it's very difficult for the democracies, the individual nations within Europe to actually come to terms with us being one Europe and not individual sovereign nations. So again, we can confront a huge array of issues, but the near-term issue is whether or not there is going to be a resolution for Greece on this particular problem, which is its bailout extension over the next few days. And that would put perhaps a plaster over what is an extremely deep wound in the whole of Europe.
Well, Anastasia Jamali, the fundamental question, does Greece still want to be part of the eurozone, do you believe?
Greece still wants to be able to survive with dignity. Whether this is a eurozone, whether Greece is welcome in the eurozone is a decision that the rest European countries, the rest members of the eurozone should make. The Greek government is calling for solidarity and for a political solution. So this is not an economic dispute anymore. We're talking about the lives of the people. So to a great extent, I would say that yes, as Euclid Tsakalotos, the team of the person who is in charge of the negotiating team, said, we systemically belong to Europe, we systemically belong to Eurozone, but we must be able to survive within it.
Well, Nina Schick, whether or not Greece remains part of the eurozone, obviously open to doubt, but there have been ideas, there have been perhaps the tactic of looking elsewhere. We've had in the course of the day a massive pipeline deal being announced between Russia and Greece, and some speculation that there might be a financial bailout from Russia, as unlikely as that seems. But is this just tactic, do you think, or is there some kind of something that lies behind this closer relationship between Russia and Greece?
Well, I think this is, much mood music in the negotiations. I think Greece is I think the current Greek government knows that they want to stay in the eurozone, and the reason why is because the Greek public wants that. I mean, you only need to look at the polls from the last few months, and 80%, those are the type of numbers of people say they want to stay in the eurozone. So in that sense, Syriza wasn't very honest about its election promises, because if you look at what they said in the run-up to the elections, that is incompatible with eurozone membership. However, since then they've obviously rode back on a lot of those election promises. So Tsipras meeting with Putin, yes, he hasn't said anything that's offensive enough to warrant, any of the eurozone partners walking out of the negotiations. However, in terms of tone, that certainly doesn't make him a beloved character in some of the other eurozone countries. Today, Merkel apparently called Tsipras and asked him to stop insulting Merkel herself and the other German politicians. You can imagine how in the rest of the eurozone this kind of mood music does not go down well, and the goodwill is certainly diminished throughout these negotiations.
Well, Anastasia Jamali, is Greece looking elsewhere? Is it looking towards Russia for a closer relationship, perhaps replacing that it has with the EU?
Well, it's not so. It's not exactly like this. I think that the Greek government wants to have more alliances and not to be only a member of the European Union and stop at that. The whole idea, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs has said many times, is to be actively friendly and to stop this passive stand they had for many years in the past. Although, as far as Russia is concerned, the main aim of the new Greek government is to make Greece a hotspot of energy, where many streams will be passing through Greece and through Greek territory in order to take advantage of its geopolitical position strategically.
Well, Nina Schick, you said a little bit earlier that whatever happens in coming days, it's still not going to address the deepest problem. Once again, it appears that we are, as we put it, kicking the can down the road, regardless of what happens by Monday. Do you believe that?
Absolutely. I mean, there were fundamentally some problems. A lot of the current Greek debt crisis is to do with the fact there was never a proper debt restructuring in Greece. Now, it has become a problem that's much bigger than Greece because, as I already mentioned, Greek debt is held by Eurozone taxpayers. This involves all kinds of big decisions to be made in the Eurozone with regards to fiscal transfers, the transfer of sovereignty. I mean, one thing, even though Syriza now, the Greek government has been putting forward, some proposals for additional debt relief for Greece, one thing that comes with that is the transfer of sovereignty. Now, are they willing to do that? It's only fair that if other Eurozone countries are putting money in, that they have some say over how that money is spent. So, as we already talked about, this is a massive existential problem facing the Eurozone, and it's certainly not one that's going to go away until there is more clarity from the Eurozone as a whole as to what its purpose will be and how it will integrate, whether or not there will be debt pooling, whether or not it's going to become a transfer union. And those are questions that it hasn't been able to answer throughout the crisis.
Well, Anastasia Jamali, very quickly, Alexis Tsipras has said that he is looking forward to that meeting of the summit meeting on Monday, that he is truly confident that there will be a deal reached, that there will be agreement. Is he being overly optimistic, do you believe, finally?
I think he's being optimistic and realistic at the same time. This thing can no longer continue. We don't, as Greeks and Europeans in general, we don't have the benefit of continuing this crisis anymore. The Greek economy cannot stand it. The The European economy will not be able to stand it eventually. We must continue with the reforms. The Greek government needs to continue with its reform program, needs to govern on the inside, needs to save the country. And dealing all the time with the negotiation and with the problems and with the refusals and with the threats is not helping very much.
Well, on that note, my thanks to our guests, Nina Schick in London and Anastasia Jamali in Athens, and also to Jane Foley, who was with us a little earlier. And thank you for watching. As always, we would like to hear your thoughts. You can contact us on our program page at aljazeera.com. You can also post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or tweet us using @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mike Hanna, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.